I am joined today by Marc Kermisch. Marc is a highly respected Twin Cities technology leader with over 2 decades of experience building products and services across a wide variety of industries. He's held coveted C-suite positions at a number of companies, including Red Wing Shoe Company, Bluestem Brands, OptumRX, and most recently with CNH Industrial. Marc, thank you so much for being in my orbit and for joining me today on Cupalo Conversations.
Absolutely, Lauren. It's fantastic to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's face it, I'm never going to be a CTO or a CIO at an enterprise company. Well, in fact, at any company. And I would love to know more about what it's like to hold that role. Before we dive into that, though, and what you've done today, walk me through your journey. How did you get to where you are?
In some respects, I'd say by accident, and in other ways, by saying yes a lot. I came out of college with an English degree. While I was in college, I got reintroduced to technology. So I was a bit of a computer geek as a kid and went off and did other things. But long story short, coming out of college with an English degree, no one's going to hire you. And I had taught myself how to program, and it was 1996, and the internet was in full swing, and people were hiring anybody who could write code. And I certainly benefited from that, and jumped right in with both feet. Learned pretty quick. I really wasn't a great coder, but I was really good at bridging the gap between a business leader and what technology could do for a business, and quickly moved into project management and product management, some account management and sales, and spent the first quarter of my career kind of working in and out of startups. And then I kind of finally went up to big corporate America when the startup community here in the Twin Cities started to dry out after the early 2000s.
Wow. Well, that's a heck of a journey. And it's nice to know us English majors. We don't maybe always become teachers or authors, but we end up finding our way.
That's right. I think there's tremendous value for English majors and, kind of Bachelor of Arts degrees, especially I think in our society, we value technical skills more so than ever, right? If it's accounting, if it's finance, legal, doctors, computer scientists, et cetera. But there's a different way of thinking when you're a Bachelor of Arts major than a Bachelor of Science major that I think the world could benefit a bit more of.
I agree. And I'm sure we could talk a whole bunch about that. And I would love to maybe another podcast episode because there's so much there. But I would love to know, as I mentioned, about what it's like to be a C-suite executive at some of these bigger companies. The things that I think we all assume is that there's a lot of decisions to be made. There's a lot of eyes on you, a lot of visibility, a lot of responsibility. Walk me through the day-to-day. What is it like being a CTO or a CIO at a large enterprise?
Yeah, I find it exhilarating in many ways. There's a tremendous amount of responsibility on your shoulders because you're representing a team, typically a sizable team, could be a couple hundred, a couple thousand. In many cases, there's no way for you to know the name of every single person on your team, but they absolutely know your name. Right. So there are a lot of eyes on you. And there's a couple of things I've learned as an executive, right? CEOs hire folks that they don't have to manage. You don't get coaching as a C-suite executive anymore. You don't have a mentor in your boss. Your boss has an objective. You and the leadership team sign up for that objective, and their expectation is that you execute. If you need something, they're expecting you to reach out to them. Rarely have I had a CEO set up one-on-ones. They're not driving my cadence. I have to drive my cadence and engage them. I think at the same time, you're expected to understand the broad themes and aspects of what's impacting your business. And at the same time, be able to go, in my opinion, very deep in how you're executing within your own function to support the broader business strategy. And I think that can be challenging because some days you're going in and you're inspecting the architecture of a particular system. The next minute you're negotiating a contract with a vendor. The next minute you're interviewing a candidate. The next minute you might be in an investor conference with your CEO. You might be talking to a media person. And yet at the same time, you're getting Teams messages and emails throughout the day and many fires. And the worst days are when something goes wrong, right? And all of a sudden, everything that was on your calendar has to be tossed out the window, and you have to go address, a critical infrastructure issue or a critical application issue. And so, when I first became a CIO, what I often would say is like, I spend maybe 10% of my time being CIO, right? The rest of my time, I am a project manager, a chief architect, shoulder to cry on, right? HR, like you name it. But to really sit back and say, I've got all the strings I can pull and just pontificate, is maybe 10% of my time.
You mentioned about technical aptitude in there, being able to have a broad understanding of the business as well as the technology. You're playing a chief architect as well as HR. You're wearing a lot of hats. I'd love to dive in more to the technical piece because from my seat, I imagine you have to be fairly technical to be able to understand the direction, especially where your engineering teams are going. But again, there's probably some assumptions in there. So where on the spectrum do you have to fall in terms of understanding with regards to technical depth?
Yeah, so I've come to the conclusion that as a CIO or a CTO, you really have to be the chief architect, right? So from that perspective, you need to know how systems flow. You need to know what the patterns are within your software. You need to understand the software development lifecycle. You need to understand the tool chain that your software engineers or your application engineers, your integration engineers are using. So you can make informed decisions on, can an application be scalable? Is it resilient? Can it meet the business needs? And as I was coming up through the ranks, I kind of saw a couple different phenomena, right? You had highly technical leaders in the CIO, CTO space that were technologists first, team leaders second, and maybe third or fourth, they would consider themselves a business leader. Oftentimes, they would lose their jobs or they would get pushed out because there was a lack of faith in their ability to drive the business result because they were so hyper technical. There's also a trend for a period of time, and some companies probably still follow this trend of like, oh, let's put a business person in there, right? The technology is a commodity, but we really need somebody who can articulate the business need, understand the business strategy, and help them drive and guide the team, but they don't need to really understand the ins and outs of how the technology works. The issue is when something does go wrong and the technology is failing, what I witnessed was they often didn't understand how a merchandising system worked. And yet the head merchant could walk circles around them. And so when there were problems, she or he couldn't step in and solve them. They had to go back and rely on the team, and they couldn't even give good advice or guidance, right? They could provide maybe some air cover, but then all of a sudden they're out the door because they're not technical enough. And so I do think you have to have this healthy blend. And I like the chief architect concept because most architects are very familiar with the business. They tend to be hyper curious. They understand how process flows impact system flows. They're often responsible for guiding and coaching and mentoring developers, and at the same time having to communicate the value of the technology back to the business and then the business requirements back to the technologists. And so I think technical aptitude is important. I think it's something you can't ignore as a C-suite executive. The way I show up to a leadership team is I'm a business person first, and my tool chest is technology. And I think there's a unique aspect of the CIO, similar to HR, similar to the CFO, is your broad functions that support the whole business, right? Head of supply chain, head of sales, a general manager of business unit, they're deep and narrow. CIOs, CFOs, CHROs are wide, right? And so one day you might be working with a supply chain leader, the next day the head of HR, the next day finance, the next day a manufacturing leader, the next day a business unit leader, the next day a product leader. And so you create this perspective that then you can apply your technical aptitude to.
Yeah. You mentioned mentorship in your first answer about what it's like day to day in the life of a CIO, CTO, and how you really don't have, I mean, you're at the top of the pyramid, and very often you have to drive your own one-on-ones. You have to actively be in the seat of mentorship or seeking mentorship. I think that's a lot of the case too for individual contributors. We only get what we ask for. But where else can you ask for it, being that you are so high up? I hear the same struggle from engineering managers, directors, VPs. It's the higher they climb, the less people are flying above them to bring them along and shepherd them. Where else do you personally seek mentorship outside of maybe the immediate company that you're employed by?
Yeah, I think it is tough, right? I think they always say the CEO is the loneliest job, right? I would say the same for most of the C-suite leaders underneath the CEO, is that's also a relatively lonely job. And when I first got promoted to a significant leadership position, we had an internal coach program at Target Corporation. And my internal coach said, just remember, Mark, every word you say, your team will act on, right? So if you're just pontificating on an idea, somebody's going to run with it thinking they can impress you and start executing when all you were doing was ideating. So you have to be really thoughtful about what your words are and be very clear and explicit in your direction of what you want or don't want them to do. Otherwise, people go off in multiple directions and then there's chaos. And it kind of gave me pause because I didn't really even have formal mentors outside the company, and it forced me to start to build, within the community of Minneapolis and St. Paul, a network that I could turn to. Right, so I started reaching out to people in similar positions, to CIOs at other companies, starting to going to meetups where there were other technologists there, and built relationships with colleagues where I could call them up and say, "Hey, I got a problem." Right? It might be a technical problem, it might be an internal political or bureaucracy problem, or it might be a talent problem. All of those things tend to come up every day. And so I did seek outside mentorship in that regard. I reached back out to some of my earliest bosses that I had good connections with, and I kind of ended up creating my own personal advisory board. And, one of my very first bosses is still on that board, almost 30 years later. And it makes me feel old because when I first met him, he just had his youngest child, and now that youngest child is getting married. And you're like, oh my God, are we old? Right? I think the other place, that I turn to is, internally, I tend to really rely on my HR business partners quite a lot. They've got a pulse to the ground within the team. They often have a pulse to the ground within the organization. It's more around probably decision-making support than it is mentorship, back to me. And then outside of that, I've hired executive coaches, somebody who has experience working across the C-suite and is going to really listen to my concerns and challenges and just offer a series of questions back, right? They don't answer it for me, but they'll often peel away the onion where you derive to your own answer. In some cases, I paid for that out of pocket because the situation I was facing where I really felt like I needed a lifeline. In other cases, the company was able to pay for that and were supportive in your development.
Yeah. Well, speaking of executive coaching, that requires a level of introspection to know I need to go seek out this resource to strengthen this muscle that either maybe is atrophied or maybe hasn't been strengthened yet before. How much are you overcoming self-doubt? You mentioned the eyes being on you, that people are hanging on every word you say. That's terrifying to me. I mean, I started sweating when you were describing what that must be like. And I am curious, at this point in your career, do you still have to battle against self-doubt and these fears of inadequacy and given this type of high visibility role?
I probably have had more need for executive coaching and mentorship in the last 3 or 4 years than I did in the first 5 or 6 of my CIO C-suite journey. And some of it I think was, situational, right? At CNH, they were going through a massive cultural change, kind of a public company reinvention, hyper competitive market, really big bets were being made within the company, some of which I was helping lead and execute against. And I didn't have a boss I could turn to and rely on from a mentorship perspective. The one colleague that was probably my internal confidant, right, that I could rely on, situations were such where the next thing I know he's working for me, and the next thing I know I'm having to dismiss him, right? And so like just aspects of that you're like, oh my God, like you don't have that solid foundation to whatever extent to find assistance. And I had to go external, right? I kind of recognized after a handful of interactions and meetings where I'm like, I am not myself, right? I'm hyper stressed. I'm usually a super calm guy. I can manage a lot coming at me, and I was lashing out. And I was finding myself having to call people and apologize because I was getting too aggressive as I was being challenged. And the good news is I was able to find an external partner who really brought some perspective. I think when I was younger in my I became a CIO at 40, and at that point there were so many folks I could turn to that were 10 years older than me that had been CIOs for a decade. And I was at Red Wing Shoes, so it was a mid-sized company, so there were people at bigger companies that could educate back. But when you're working at a $24 billion global manufacturer that's not even headquartered in your hometown, where there really wasn't any equivalent business here in the Twin Cities where I could call up the CIO and say, hey, how do you handle this, right? You had to look elsewhere. And so I think it really, for me at least, it almost felt like a reverse, right? Where early in my CIO ship, the mentorship was primarily through colleagues and external and internal in both cases. As the more seasoned I got, the bigger the company, the more lonely it gets, the less proof points of other companies that are doing the same thing. And people are like, I just don't deal with that, Mark. I don't have a global team, or I'm not managing an acquisition of $2 billion or whatever it might be, right? So that's kind of how, it occurred or happened for me. I do think most folks, too often, they don't think about formal mentorship when they get to the C-suite. They almost think like, hey, I made it and I'm at the top of the mountain, right? For me, that was almost disorientating. So, when I first got to Red Wing Shoes and after the excitement of getting that first CIO job kind of wore off and you're dealing with something hairy and gnarly and you're like, I'm 40 and I've achieved what I've thought about for the last 20 years, right? So like, what's next? Like, what's the bigger challenge after this? And so I kind of lost my true north for a little while. And so you kind of had to kind of re-baseline where it's like, I'm no longer striving to be at the table. I'm at the table. Now what?
Yeah. I would love to know more about the what's next, because you are at this point in your career where you've had a number of seats at these types of tables. What does it look like for a CTO, a CIO to continue to progress in their career? I mean, I know you've been involved with a number of boards. Is that the direction that somebody in your shoes heads?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's, one that is very pertinent to me at the moment, right? And, I think there's a couple ways you look at it. One, I think board service work is another great way. For me, I get a lot of value out of being able to mentor and advise, in most cases, a smaller company that wouldn't have access to high quality talent that has gone across multiple industries. Those board positions are very challenging to obtain, right? It's a combination of networking the heck out of it, telling everybody in the world you want to be on a board and be able to articulate why and what you can bring to that board. And then a little bit of luck and persistence. I get asked that question all the time, like, how did you get on a board? I'm like, I told everybody what I wanted to do and why, and eventually somebody said, I'll give you a chance, right? I think the other place is, there's a lot of startup communities out there now that are very vibrant and they're constantly looking for advisement. And better yet, if you can be a early mover customer for that startup, and as CTO, you can provide a lot more hands-on advice. And then the fun thing is I've worked with those startups, like they're doing things that I could never do within my company because of bureaucracy. So it reminds you that there's a different way to do work. And so there's a little bit of reverse mentoring that can occur for you as well. I've been in the C-suite 10 years and I'm at a point now where, you kind of say, okay, I can keep doing the C-suite, but is that really what gets me out of bed every morning and gets me super excited? Being a part of a C-suite, you kind of have the identity of that as a part of your brand. There's a compensation component that comes with that can help you build, lasting wealth for you and your family. There can be a personal gratification out of leading and mentoring your team. But on the flip side, the cost is you really don't control your day to day. Your day to day is controlled by your company and your team. It can be very, very high stress. If you're not disciplined, you can sacrifice your health. You can sacrifice time with your family. You miss critical moments in your personal life. All of a sudden, 10 years have gone by and your kids are growing out of the house and, there's distance between you and your spouse. And maybe you're not as healthy as you were. And so as you go through this journey, you have to really be clear on what your true north is personally and say, okay, I'm not sacrificing my health, right? I'm going to go out to dinners with my team, but I'm going to get the salad, or I'm not going to drink the wine or whatnot. When you're a manager or director, you're still a part of the team for the most part. At some point, you're now the boss and you can't go out to those happy hours anymore. At the end of dinner, you need to go back to your hotel while the team goes out. And in part, some of that is just healthy separation, making sure you don't put yourself in a compromising situation. And in part, the team doesn't necessarily want you there, right? They enjoy the dinner part, but when they want to go have fun, they don't want the boss looking over the shoulder, right?
Sure.
And so there's, just interesting nuances that, at 35 years old, as I was still going up the chain, I wouldn't have thought about.
What is it like from your perspective in terms of dealing with politics and bureaucracy? is there really a hamstringing effect of them on your ability to be effective and take the company in the direction that you see fit? What is it like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's 100% in front of your face every day. Bureaucracy to me is what the culture is at the middle of the company is what the company is. I've seen scenarios where myself, the CEO, a business unit leader make an edict, right? Like I am commanding the organization to do X. And as it works its way down into the organization, Z happens. And you're like, wait, what happened to X? And it just got whittled away, right? For whatever reason, well, we have a process in place and we can't change that process, or there's a regulation that's there, or, it's just not the way we do it here, Mark, right? Whatever those excuses are, like the bureaucracy happens and decisions can get unwound. They can move at such a slow pace that what you're trying to achieve doesn't happen, and all of a sudden the opportunities passed us by. There are certainly times where you can call the frontline employee that's standing in your way, and all of a sudden they will do it, but they'll do it once. And then they're going to be really annoyed because you had to call them and put them in their place, and they're not going to want to lift a finger to do it again. More so than ever at the C-suite, like it is a series of compromises and coalitions. And so if myself and a peer are not seeing eye to eye, somebody's got to blink and find a workable solution. And 9 times out of 10, I would say I felt like I was the one blinking, right? As the CTO, CIO is typically a support function within the organization. Your job is to move the ball forward every day. And if you're not moving the ball forward, you are part of the problem. And so I think you have to really look in the mirror and say, is this a hill I need to die on? Or can I find the outcome I really want? But it might mean I have to make a compromise here or there. Yeah. Now, the beauty is when you're at the top, maybe you have 12 peers and your politics are kind of sitting there. When you're in the middle of the organization, you could have 100 peers or 200 peers, or United, it was 2,000 peers. But I am a believer that there's two hard truths in companies. Companies tend to have a functional true north. They're a sales-driven company. They're a finance-driven company. They're a product-driven company. They're a merchandise-driven company. And if you can't figure out what your company is, you need to spend time to understand it, because that's where your politics and bureaucracy are going to come from. The second thing is there's an operating cadence of every company, and there's aspects of that operating cadence that create bureaucracy and politics in and of itself. And that's where you have to kind of really start to study that to say, how can I then take advantage of it? Right? There is that concept of the art of war. And part of the art of war is really studying your adversaries. And I would translate it as you really need to understand your organization. So if you walk around with blinders on and I'm just the CIO and CTO and everybody else, needs to orientate around me, you won't end up with the same success versus why is my business unit leader acting the way they are? Shit, he had a personal issue I didn't even know about, right? So his thoughts are on his family, and now he's just being pissed off because he's got to be here for something. So all those things factor in, and as a C-suite leader, I think part of your job is to be able to read people, interpret situations, and to some extent see around corners.
Speaking of true north and a mission, it feels like the last few years there's been a lot of emphasis around a company mission statement that has nothing to do with coming right out and saying, hey, we're in this to make money. And that is why we're in business, is to make money ultimately. But it's the be human, bring your whole self to work. And I got to tell you, I find it almost laughable. And I don't mean to mock that there isn't some sort of altruistic goal behind that too, which is making people feel like they're in a safe work environment. They're welcome to show up and bring their ideas and bring their unique perspective. But there is some part of me where that's getting so much attention, and that's the emphasis the company is pouring out. But then you have, 1,000 people get laid off because the company can't support paying their salary. How do you feel about the corporate Kool-Aid heavy focus on a mission statement that actually isn't explicitly saying we're here to make money? How do you feel about those types of things?
I'm going to probably answer this question a few different ways, right? Companies are teams, right? Companies are striving to be high-performing teams. And if you played soccer, football, basketball, baseball, if you were, a theater geek, right, or a choir geek, there was always some aspect of competition, right? Who's getting the lead part? Who's getting the solo? Who's the starter, right? Who's not? And I do think a lot of people come into an organization not realizing that they're a part of a high-performing team. The CEO is the head coach or the general manager, and everybody else is a coach of their aspect of it. And if you think about it in those terms, what does a coach do? You might be the best guy in the world, but if you're not performing at the highest level, like, you're going to get benched or you might get cut from the team. Ultimately, the coach is always going to be looking at, like, I want 100% A players on my team all of the time. And so, I do think if you're not approaching a corporate environment with that type of mindset, you're thinking you're showing up to family where there's unconditional love and you will be forgiven when you make a mistake, and they'll be there to put a Band-Aid on your knee when you scratch your knee, and they'll coddle you when you're sad and pat you on the back when you're happy. Like, even those that work at family-oriented companies, at the end of the day, it's still a team, right? Second, we're a capitalist country, and I think we're one of the greatest countries in the world, and I think capitalism should be embraced, not shunned upon. And, I think there is an aspect of, yes, society has some responsibilities to take care of every individual, but every individual has a responsibility to take care of themselves. And so if you're not taking care of yourself, then all of a sudden you're in a situation that somebody else is dictating your outcome. And so when I was at Target Corporation and I was needing that mentorship and realized I had no network, like, I promised myself I will never be beholden to any one company ever again. I will bet on myself every time. I will be self-sufficient. I will have my own capabilities, my own network, because I might get cut for no fault of my own. And Target was a place where I realized that job was the first job that I could be fired for doing everything right, but the winds of politics just switched on me, right? I do believe you as an individual have a hell of a lot more gratification in your work if your mission of your company gets you excited every day. Serving farmers and construction workers, blue collar workers, manufacturing workers. When I was at Red Wing, when I was at CNH, like, that's a mission that just got me super excited. It's a customer that I can connect with. It's a customer that really needs the product you're delivering. I can touch and feel the products that we were selling. If I juxtapose that to Bluestem Brands, where they're effectively a credit company, right? And they're providing credit for those that can't afford traditional credit tools. I was like, like, that's not a mission that I could really get behind. Like, I made a lot of money and I could make money doing it, but did I connect with the clientele? Did I feel good about the product that we were selling? And did they feel good with a brand affinity about the product that they were buying? No, it was just different, right? And so I do think there is an aspect of the mission is important. The mission of a company, to me, though, of bring your whole self to work is a bit laughable, right? Because it'll be bring your whole self to work, but not that part, right? I do think it's unfortunate. There seems to be a bit of a backlash against inclusivity and diversity and inclusion as a whole. At least within the United States. I think it's been politicized, unfortunately. I think there's a tremendous need for diverse thought, for inclusion, for recognizing that certain doors have been closed over time for certain types of people. I think the hard part is right or wrong, as the country embraced it, they forgot that there's the other side, of those that maybe were there. All of a sudden, they don't have an affinity group. There's not an employee research group for this population. And so then they start to kind of go, well, where's my spot if the company isn't talking about me, but everybody else? And so I think it's difficult for a company to wade into those waters because somebody's always going to be left behind. So I go back to, we're here to make money. We're here to be on the highest performing team, which we all should want to be the highest performer, and really think about what the product your company is selling and does that get you excited? If selling financial instruments gets you excited, or health insurance, or goods through a store, that's fantastic. An anchor on that is the mission that you look for versus whatever's written on the words and the mission vision statements that companies have.
Yeah. I appreciate your emphasis on the individual. I think it's truly empowering. There's a lot of language out there to the contrary that says, oh, woe is me, or, this so-and-so should be doing this for me. And I think that there's nothing more hamstringing than to give your power away to somebody else, be it another person or a company. And you're right. I mean, no one is safe. I think a hard lesson that's been learned by a lot of people in 2023 and 24 with the number of layoffs that we've seen across the board in so many industries is that no one's safe. I mean, I talk to a lot of consultants or people who are interested in consulting, and they say, "Oh, I don't know if it's as safe as being a full-time employee." And it's like, there's no one
No.
is safe, right? Like, I mean, even yourself included, being at the very top of the ladder. In fact, you have a hell of a lot more riding on your shoulders than most people, and so I think that is very empowering. And speaking of layoffs, my second to last question for you today is, how is it to be in your shoes during a very, let's say, a large company wide layoff? Because there's a lot of emphasis on the people who are affected by that. I've been myself affected by layoffs, so I know what it's like and been a witness to a number of them. But there isn't often a whole lot of sympathy for those at the top who seem to be hovering their finger over the red button and other people's, livelihoods being impacted. But I would love to know what it is like to be in your shoes, making those decisions, and then the after effects of that.
Laying an individual off or having to go through a mass layoff is one of the worst things as a leader that I can do, right? You often have to live with the fact that you're going to be laying folks off for months before it happens, right? And so, you kind of have this scenario, you're walking through the hallways, and you're like, that person's gone, that person's gone, that person. It's like you're in this dead man walking zone, and you have all this information that you have to hold and bear, and the anxiety grows, right? And in a layoff situation, it's never the fault of the employee, right? They could be a so-so performer, they could be a high performer, they could be a manager or an individual contributor. The decisions that go around that, they're often going to come down to, cost cutting, right? And so where can I create the biggest savings for the company when the company has a time of need? Because at the end of the day, I'm putting on my hat of, I got to make sure the whole team is healthy. And if I've got to reduce the team size to keep the rest of the company afloat, like that's what I need to do as a company hat guy. But on the individual level, like we're all humans, and it wears on you tremendously. And it doesn't matter if you know how you have an employee that's not going to make it, the best thing you can do for both of you is to just say, hey, this isn't working for us. Let's have an adult conversation about it. In a mass layoff situation, it's showing empathy, right? And for me, I often will reach out afterwards. How can I help you? What can I do? Right? Make sure you take advantage of these resources. And I've been lucky in that most of those that I've unfortunately had to lay off over time, like we're still connected in some way, shape, or form. And what I've always said to folks when I work with them is like, look, when you work for me, you're a part of my community and my network. Like we don't have to be adversaries. There's always going to be a point of anger, and you kind of go through that grief curve. And at some point you kind of say, okay, like I'm okay to go forward. Like everything that happens at work, you have to have this lens of not personal. And it's super easy to say until it's you, right? And I've been on both sides. I don't think anyone's cold to the concept of having to go through layoffs, and it weighs on every leader. There's a level of guilt. That they have to go home and tell their spouse that they're going to have anxiety, and you try to create a situation that you give them as much cushion for them to find their next thing as possible. I think the only time is when it's not been super hard is when you're in a performance management situation where you've given clear objectives, you've given them a fair shake to address the performance concerns, and they just haven't been able to do it. And, you kind of finally have to part ways in that regard.
Yeah, well, I definitely think dignity is an important thing to maintain on both sides. And the leaders who do it well, to your point, I think they recognize this is a human being. It isn't easy. There's empathy there, but there's also, this is business, and there's something to be said for holding that line. Again, it's not a family. This isn't forever. There's no unconditional love. There's a lot of respect here, and I do think those lines sometimes get very blurry. It's tough. Human emotions are tough to wade through.
I think, as you're going up in your career, it's inevitable that it's going to happen, that you're going to have to lay somebody off, right? Thinking about just summoning the courage to do it with dignity and empathy, I think is something super important. I had the benefit maybe when I was in the dot-com era in the late 90s of being at a company that went through wave after wave of layoff, and I felt like I saw every flavor of it. Everyone's in a big room. Go to your conference room. Some conference rooms were the death chamber. Some conference rooms were the savior. Next time was like, hey, there's a list on the back of the wall. Find your name, right? Next time is everyone's in the room. Go back to your desk, and if there's a box on your desk, you're out. Like you name it, I saw it, right? And the benefit of going through that so early in my career is that it sits with you. And when you're in the situation having to lay somebody off, you can pull back on that experience and said, is that what I want to show? Unfortunately, a lot of companies hire consulting firms like the McKinseys and BCGs of the world. And they put these amazing ways of doing it. They think it's all humane, but they've actually never fired anybody in their life. And like, you got to always take a pause and go, is this human? It's like, is this humane? Right? Does this show empathy? Like, can I have dignity through the process? And as they say, you never want to surprise somebody, and ideally in a layoff situation, the company has talked about the concerns. So even if it's a surprise that they are the one getting laid off, they understand the context of the company. It's the worst when there's no sign of it at the company, and all of a sudden they're laying folks off, and everyone goes, "Oh wait, I thought our revenue was good. Like I thought we were hitting our objectives." At CNH, when we went through this, as the ag cycle went down, the CEO was very intentional about talking about it months before it happened, right? And using words of like, we're going to have to trim our organization's expenses. We're going to have to look at our labor allocation. We're going to have to say goodbye to really great talent, right? It's just a fact of making sure we as a company survive, because we employ 45,000 people. Then you have to make sure that we can continue to employ, if it's 43,000 or 40,000, that's a lot more mouths than those that we're not. I can't think of one instance of a layoff where somebody didn't end up in a better spot at the end of the day either, right? Yeah. It might have taken some time to get there, but I do think in this day and age, I remember in my 20s talking with my wife, and I said, hey, by the time we're 50, like we're probably going to be getting laid off, right? When you're in your 40s and 50s, you're expensive, right? You've got family obligations, probably not wanting to work 12, 14-hour days anymore. Your friends aren't at work as they were when you're in your 20s. And that's just a fact of life. I think you see it even in this generation coming out with some of the demands they're putting on companies where, they want to live life versus live to work, right?
Yeah. I know people who've been looking for the right opportunity for more than a year. And I've had some really beautiful conversations with them about the level of introspection they finally had time to take, which we don't often get if we constantly have our head down and we're just grinding away day after day. So sometimes a layoff can even be kind of a beautiful gift in that you get breathing room and you get to figure out, what the hell do I want? I don't want to work for a company like that, or this isn't the problem domain I want to be in, or this isn't the industry I want to be in. It's quite risky. So I've had the privilege of having a number of conversations where people walk away going, oh, wow, I learned a lot about myself through that process. So, yeah, my last question for you today, Marc, are there other things you wish people understood about your world?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple, right? And maybe I'll take like 3 different lenses of it. As CIO or CTO, I'm usually only as good as the nearest iPhone is working, right? So if I'm in a room and the projector doesn't work, Teams meeting doesn't work, somebody's iPhone's not working, like they're looking to you, even though that's like audio visual guy in high school, right? Like, hey, Mark, can you get this to work? And you're like, oh, I haven't done that in 20 years, but sure, I'll go figure it out, right? And there's an aspect of just humbleness right there. Like when you're in a sales meeting, no one looks to the sales guy and says, hey, that sales report's wrong. So there is that aspect of people look at technology very much as a commodity these days, even though it's central to absolutely everything we do. Yeah, I think the second thing is, say what you will about Tom Brady, but a guy who can win Super Bowls at 40 plus years old, he never settled. Every offseason, it was, how can I get better? Right. And at his level, like it's increments of improvement versus massive leaps of improvement. And as a C-level leader, like you have to have the same attitude. Like what got you here will not keep you here. And you have to constantly be learning and striving and bettering yourself and consuming information. And I used to think like, God, why are they so smart right at the top? And what I realized is every promotion you get, you have a different purview, right? You're at a different level of the mountain. And when you're at the base of the mountain, all you see is trees. When you're at the top of the mountain, you can see the whole valley and maybe even the ocean. And so there is an aspect of that comes with the nature of moving up the ladder, that you get different information, you can see differently, but it also means you have to get out there and constantly learn. And I think the last thing that I would say is, unfortunately, technology is not well understood because you can't touch and feel it very well, right? At least in most enterprises. If you're a manufacturer, I had a CEO come to me and says, Mark, when I got a manufacturing problem, I can walk on the manufacturing floor and they can show it to me. Like I go down to your floor and like nobody's on the floor doing work. So like, where are you guys? I'm like, well, we can do our work from anywhere, right? And then of course there's the guy with the long ponytail, the goth looking girl, the hippie looking guy, someone's wearing sweatpants, like everyone's got headphones on, no one's talking to each other, right? It's a different world. And so as a CTO, CIO, it's like, okay, I have to actually bring to life technology. Uh, and unfortunately, we're often viewed as an expense. And yet, I would have these discussions with my leaders and peers of like, they want you to cut your budget. I'm like, great, I'll turn off that machine, I'll turn off that system, and then they scream, you can't do that, right? I'm like, well, if you want to have technology, you have to pay for it. And so there's always this constant justification that we are the utility that drives our business, and if you like it or not, there's a cost to that utility to do it well. Uh, and some CEOs look at it as a competitive advantage and it's a great environment. In other cases, they look at it as an expense and they're like, I want to spend less. And then they complain that they can't move the needle because they're not investing the way they should. So, like, those are the three things that, when you look at the CIO, CTO, like, those are aspects that you always have to factor into what that role is about.
Yeah. Well, as you said, you have to bring to life technology. That's beautifully said. I feel like you brought to life today a lot of what it's like to be in your seat. There's myself included. I'll never hold the role you've ever held. And I really appreciate everything today, Mark, because there is so much, especially the last few years, when it comes to establishing mission statements, navigating a really difficult macroeconomy, the number of layoffs. There's a lot of finger pointing. I don't think there's a lot of understanding. And as you talked about empathy, I wanted to better understand what it's like being in your seat. And there are challenges that many of us will never face, and having to continue to push yourself to learn. I also wish I had played more team sports, because how much you've referenced that today makes you think I missed out on something.
Well, the irony is most of my sports were individual sports, right? As a
Yeah,
kid,
same.
I didn't play on a lot of teams. But I think maybe as a parting comment, right? Everyone always says the best laid plans, are thrown out as soon as you make the first play, right? You can plan as much as you want. If you think about your career, like there's no way to plan out from point A to point B. You can say like, if you asked me at 22 what I wanted to do when I was 32, different answers, right? I went to college being a physical therapist, graduated with an English degree, got into technology, right? So I think the best thing you can do is, learn how to hustle, constantly keep learning and making yourself better. Early in your career, I think you need to say yes more than you say no. And late in your career, you need to say no more than you say yes, right? So, and there's no wrong answer. And an HR leader once tell me, as long as there's a story behind why you shifted companies, Mark, nobody's going to care. And so I would encourage those that might be listening, like, don't get caught up in what's right or wrong. Just embrace the journey. Have a true north that you're anchoring towards. Be able to understand the why of why you might want to move up the ladder, and be comfortable if the answer is I don't. Like if I love to code, why would you ever want to manage anybody? Like just code, right? Don't worry about it. And hopefully have some fun along the way.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Mark. I really appreciate all your time today, your insights, and just for being in my orbit. I feel you mentioned about learning and just staying open. I think being a curious cat seems like it's one of your superpowers, and I'm grateful to know you as a result.
Well, it was a pleasure to be here, Lauren.